I'm so glad there are people here. When I agreed to do this at first, of course, I was going to be speaking to an empty room. So I am so happy to see you here. Welcome to it's Faith Transition, Spiritual Trauma, and Mental Health, an Evolving Conversation. And as I've already learned, a couple of people were still under the assumption this was a panel discussion. So I am your panel. I hope no one is too disappointed in that. And I feel like there's a dissociative identity disorder joke there somewhere, that maybe I am the entire panel. I'll be taking on different roles today. But I am Tony Overbay. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I wanted to really quickly address the two, if you read in the program, it talked about two things that we will know after the completion of the presentation. Participants will be able to receive an overview of efforts across Utah to address spirituality and mental health in general. And two, they will receive an overview and sharing of direct experience of experts working across faith and mental health. So let me be honest. I don't live in Utah. I grew up in Utah, so I think Utah is probably doing a lot of great things, as in having this conversation here at this conference. So speaking to the first, I believe that is what Utah is doing to address spirituality and mental health, is bringing awareness and having the conversation. Now, two, I'm going to go big on two. I'm going to give you a lot of direct experience in working with faith and mental health, as this is an area that I get to speak on regularly. And I was also asked if I was okay doing my own introduction. And I'm sure all of you have presented at certain times, and I am so happy to do my own introduction, because basically I gave you my name, and now let's begin, right? I think when you probably all had that experience where you write your bio and you don't really think about the fact that somebody's going to be reading that while you're sitting there beside them the entire time, and you've made yourself sound really important and that sort of thing. So I'm Tony, and I'm excited to talk to you today, and I'll get a little bit more into some of my background as we go along today, because I think that's part of the story of working with people that are experiencing faith journeys, faith crisis, and how that affects mental health. So let me kind of share with you then the way I like to present, as you will notice, is I don't have a PowerPoint. And it may sound a little bit like maybe I didn't prepare, and there's some truth to that. But in general, what I've noticed is that we're all going to hear the things that we're going to hear today through our own lens. And so I've noticed that at times when we have a PowerPoint, there are people that are taking notes, and sometimes we're more focused on the notes, and we got to get the notes down than really letting the topic kind of wash over us. And why I say that is especially when you're talking about things like faith journey. In the topic here, it talks about spiritual trauma and mental health, is that I know that everyone in here, you're working with different populations, so you might be working with teens who are part of a whole worldwide reduction in religiosity in general, so you might be hearing it through that lens, or couples where one of the spouses is experiencing a faith journey, and that's showing up as a giant wedge in the relationship, or maybe individuals who have been part of a high-demand religion and who are coming to terms with maybe their sexuality, maybe wondering where they fit in, or people that are just curious, people that have different values, maybe values of knowledge or values of authenticity, and so they are maybe struggling to fit in with their community, the community that they've grown up with. So I would just encourage you to take notes as they come to you, and then when you get access to this recording after, I would love for you to go back and maybe listen and take a look at it then, and you'll discover something different, I guarantee. And this is going to sound like I'm trying to market myself, and I promise not, but if you do go to, it's my name, tonyoverbay.com, and a slash and the word stages, then I will give you, there's a downloadable copy of a document that we're going to talk a little bit today, which is James Fowler's Stages of Faith. And then anyone that does go there, what I like to do after the presentation is I'll get a transcription, and then I'll make that available so that you can go back through and see those things that were important to you, and then maybe pick up on some of the things that you might not have heard during the presentation. So let me give you a little bit of background. I'm 51. I've been married for 30 years. I have 4 kids, ages 17, 19, 21, and 23. I've been in Northern California since 1993, but I moved to Utah when I was in 5th grade. I had a horrible Southern accent, moved from Tennessee, was made fun of mercilessly, but then fit in and absolutely loved Utah. And I went to Alta High School. I grew up in Sandy and married my high school sweetheart there. I'm a University of Utah graduate, where this is where I usually insert the joke about BYU people doing a groan or a moan, but I loved my time here in Utah. And other than a couple of years, I went off and tried to play baseball at Kansas State University. It really was a phenomenal experience. I spent 10 years in the computer software injury, is that a Freudian slip of some sort? Industry right out of college, and realized that was not something that felt like a calling to me. And so in my early 30s, I went back to grad school, got my master's in counseling, and I actually worked as an intern for LDS Family Services for about 6 or 7 years. And my goal was always for that to be a part-time gig. I thought that I really enjoyed being an entrepreneur, technology, that sort of thing. And so over time, though, I found that really was what I loved. That was my passion. And so along the way, though, and I promise this is going to get to our topic here, but along the way, I really felt a call or a passion to work with men and working with men's issues. I've now since learned in my own therapy journey that growing up, it wasn't normal, that every 16-year-old kid couldn't wait to be a father and a husband, but I couldn't wait, and I love those roles. I love those titles. So I wanted to help all guys work with men's issues. As I went through grad school and I would give the speech about this is why I'm here, the girls in the class would often fawn and the teachers would chuckle, and I never understood why until I got out into therapy and found out that a lot of men weren't coming into sessions. And so then the men that were coming in when I was working as an intern were primarily struggling with some impulse or compulsive sexual behavior, typically in the world of pornography. And then I was also getting people that were struggling with faith journey, faith crisis. And those were two of the areas that I really saw a lot of my work with. And so in working with the addiction piece in particular, I quickly realized that it was fairly easy, or people had an understanding of the things that they were, quote, supposed to do to be able to overcome addiction. But I started finding that it really was more than that, that the quote, addiction or the compulsive or impulsive nature that I was seeing in my office was more of a coping mechanism for what I started to identify as, I call them my 5 voids. So I started finding that a lot of the guys that were coming into my office were struggling in their marriages, or they were struggling with parenting, or they were struggling in their career. They weren't doing what they thought that they wanted to do. They were struggling in their health, or they were struggling in their faith. And so I found that it was much more helpful for me to try to go off and find some sort of nice evidence-based model to work with each one of those voids. So I went out and learned all I could about emotionally focused therapy, EFT, and I actually started working with couples. I never anticipated being a couples therapist, but I found that as I would help men be more connected with their partners, that there was a lot less desire to turn to an unhealthy coping mechanism. So the same was said with parenting. So I just devoured the nurtured heart approach as a parenting model, and I loved that. And I felt like, okay, now we could really help people learn how to feel more connected as a parent. And in their careers, I'm a big fan of acceptance and commitment therapy, and I learned how to work with people and point them toward their values. And I had a experience myself of realizing I wasn't doing what I wanted to do with my life career-wise. And then health, part of I'm an avid runner. I've run 100+ marathons and ultra marathons, including a dozen of 100 miles or more. And I did a fundraiser in my area for years where I ran 24 hours around a track to raise money for the schools that in California at that time were losing a lot of funding. And I feel like this is something I can trot out here that I think you guys will appreciate, but that people usually don't think is funny. I would speak at all these schools, and people would say, "Why do you run so much?" And I would say, "Oh, so I can eat ice cream," And then I realized, oh no, it's so that I'd found this socially healthy or socially acceptable addiction of sorts. And it was actually in training to come back home and run the Wasatch 100-miler where I broke my ankle about 2 weeks before, and that was one of the first times in 15 years where I wasn't able to run 6 days a week. And very quickly I found that when I wasn't running, I was shorter and balder and a worse husband and father and all those things. And I realized, oh, that's why I run. One second. So of course, I decided that I would be able to have all my clients become ultramarathon runners, and to this day, some 15 years later, I think 2 of them have. So, but trying to really help people find what motivates them in the health. So that left a fifth, my fifth void, so to speak, was faith. And so when I was working in the setting that I was working a lot in the world of things like apologetics, and where I was learning to have logical arguments for people that were struggling with specific issues. And I was finding that for some people that were coming in, that wasn't really scratching that itch of what they were coming in to talk about. And so that kind of took me on a journey. As I mentioned, I wanted to find all of these models or ways to communicate with people in these other areas, but I really was struggling to find something that I felt really made a difference or an impact when it came to helping people with their faith journeys. Or when I was then getting couples that were presenting in a mixed faith marriage environment or these kind of things. So let me take a quick step back. When I was in college, and I don't know, a lot of us are contemporaries, maybe in age, I worked at a video store. And I think everybody's old enough here that I don't even have to make the joke of telling what those things are. But I worked in the area for one that was called Sounds Easy Video. It then went on to become Video Shark is what it was called. And the owners were amazing people. But one of the type of movies, I love movies, but one of the type of movies that I love, it's called a frame story, or it's called reverse chronology. And it's one of those where they kind of show you what is happening now, and then you kind of go back in time. So I want to now, as I jump into this journey, this faith transitions or faith crisis and mental health, I want to present to you this frame story. And I want to start with what I have found has been incredibly effective. And then as I work through the various stages of faith, Fowler stages of faith, then I really feel like we can have a good conversation on why I have found that has really resonated as a way to continue to have open conversations and help people find a place where they really do feel like they can be themselves or really kind of find themselves living true to their values, which really impacts their mental health. So here's where I'm going to go with this is, so we're gonna use a framework of James Fowler's stages of faith, and we're also going to have heavy doses of Dr. Stephen Hayes' acceptance and commitment therapy. We'll go into that a little bit, and then brought together or communicated with this glue of Sue Johnson's emotionally focused therapy, or EFT. So for those who are not familiar with James Fowler, Fowler's stages of faith, Fowler was born in 1940. Passed away in 2015. He was an American theologian who was professor of theology and human development at Emory University. And he was the director of both the Center for Research on Faith and Moral Development and the Center for Ethics until he passed away. And let's see. And so he's best known, so he was a minister at the United Methodist Church, but he was best known for his developmental model based on faith, where he wrote about in a book called Stages of Faith, The Psychology of Human Development and the Quest for Meaning. And his developmental model has been empirically investigated with the creation of research instruments like the Faith Development Scale by Gary Leake. And more importantly, the stages of faith theory has been used in pastoral counseling and spiritual care, and it's taught in seminaries and other faith-based educational institutions worldwide. So according to Fowler, there are 7 primary stages of faith, which is including a stage 0 that a lot of people don't talk about. And they are as follows, and we're going to get into some good discussion here. And I would love to hear some questions along the way as well, if you have them. So stage 0, he calls it primal and differentiated faith. This is age birth to 2 years old. And he says this stage is very much like Erik Erikson's first stage of trust versus mistrust. So this is where a baby acquires experiences from their outer environment that either instill in them a feeling of trust and assurance from being comforted or having their needs met, living in a secure and stable environment, experiencing a sense of consistency and care from parents. And then these personalized experiences, according to Fowler, essentially translate into feelings of trust and assurance in the universe and harmony with the divine. And conversely, experiences of parental or environmental neglect or abuse at this stage of development can result in a formation of feelings of mistrust and fear. Fowler posits within the universe and the divine, which can actually start to sow seeds for later doubt and existential angst. And this stage also compares with Piaget's sensory motor stage of cognitive development, where thinking takes place in and through the body. So that's the stage 0, and a lot of times you won't hear a lot about stage 0 faith. Where things start to get interesting is in this stage 1. So stage 1 is this intuitive and projective faith, and typically this is around ages 3 to 7. And children at this stage have acquired language and the ability to work with symbols to express thought. And children at this stage don't develop formalized religious beliefs, and think of that word intuitive or projective faith, but instead they're affected by the exposure to the unconscious and this relative fluidity of their patterns of thought. And simply put, I often say here that the projective part is the key. I often say, think of this as kids are playing on the ground with their toys, and kids say, hey kids, or parents say, hey kids, there's a God, and they say, okay, but they just, continuing to kind of be kids and do the things that they do. Stage 2 is pretty fascinating. This one's age 7 to 12. This one's called mythic and literal faith. And children at this stage, they start to have a belief in justice or fairness in religious matters, and a sense of reciprocity in the workings of the universe, that meaning that if you're doing good, that you will receive good. And conversely then, to a kid, then if you are doing bad, you will receive bad. Or if bad happens, then maybe that is something that you have done. And this is an entirely different topic, but a lot of the work that I get to do in faith journey, faith crisis, when you find people that become That when OCD comes into the mix, you've maybe heard of scrupulosity, which is the OCD of religious thought. And so you can start to see, and we'll talk about this in a minute too, where some of the makings of some of these type of things can come into play as well. But simply put, into the mythic and literal phase, again, I like to say that think of the mythic and literal portion of that. At this point, kids are learning that there's a Santa Claus, a Jesus, a Batman, the Tooth Fairy, and all of them are mythic, all of them are literal. So in that stage 2 faith, Fowler did have a point there where he said that some people can remain in this stage for their lives. So I just think of Lenny and of Mice and Men. I haven't really run into people that stay in this stage 2 faith. Where things get really, really interesting and where we're going to go onto some different, some side tangents that I think will be fascinating are stage 3. So stage 3, Fowler calls it synthetic and conventional faith, and this is age 12 to adult. And there are a lot of people that stage 3 is where they find the greatest comfort, meaning, identity, and this is a place where many people will stay the rest of their life. And so stage 3 is characterized by the identification of the adolescent and adult with a religious institution. And know that James Fowler, he was looking at all-encompassing belief systems. So this wasn't anything that was specific to a particular belief system, but he looked at a variety or a group of all-encompassing belief systems. So this one, the belief system or the authority, the group of a growth of a personal religious or spiritual identity. So conflicts that occur when one's beliefs are challenged are often ignored because they represent too much of a threat to one's faith-based identity. This stage and all the other stages we'll talk about correspond to Piaget's stage of formal operational thinking. So it makes it possible for an adolescent or adult to perceive the divine as an abstract or formless manifestation. Most people move on to the stage as teenagers, and at this point, their life has grown to include several different social circles, and there's a need to pull it all together. And when this happens, a person usually adopts some sort of all-encompassing belief system. However, at this time, people have a hard time seeing outside of their box. And I want to introduce the concept of the box, and I don't want to say that with any negative connotation. But if you look at an all-encompassing belief system, and you think of it that it all fits in a box, from cradle to grave, or even from before to even after, that everything fits in the box. Every belief, every idea, and it's all there. So for people that are seeking answers within that stage 3 box, then those answers, they've always been told, are there. They're within the box. And so at this time, people have a hard time seeing outside of their box, and they often don't recognize that they are inside of a belief system. And at this stage, authority is usually placed in individuals or groups that represent one's beliefs, and this is the stage where many people remain. And so, again, here's where things get pretty fascinating. So I want to, and I'll say this multiple times today, but this is not just because we think of numbers as linear, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're not saying that, so 4 must be better than 3, and 5 must be even 2 better than 3. This isn't that, but this is more of ways to start to have a conversation, and I think that you'll see that how this can benefit our clients. So challenges to stage 3 is this is where I say that people start employing the what's wrong with me story because of their life experiences. So people have their own experiences that at times maybe don't feel like they fit inside that theological box. And often I say that you can, and maybe you've had that experience yourself, but where you start to feel like, okay, what's wrong with me? People around me within my faith community seem to have things pretty easy, or they get the answers that they want, or they do the things that we've always been told and it seems to work for them. So whenever we start to get into this what's wrong with me story, that's where I feel like as a professional, where we start to say, okay, we need to really start to work from here, because I know for me, and we'll get into this in a minute, I'm not a big fan of the what's wrong with me story, or I'm broken, or those kind of things. So we'll talk about that. So when people come into our offices and they're told that they just need to have more faith, or one of the ones I get the most are, if you tell me to just pray and read my scriptures more, I'm walking out. And so, and oftentimes, even if we feel like, well, it wouldn't be a bad idea, but you have to meet that client where they're at. So many times when they've been in that stage 3 box, I always say they're kind of banging around on the sides, they're peeking out of the top, and a lot of times the answers that people get in there are just have more faith, try harder. And it's not like the people that are in that stage 3 space and they start to go to this what's wrong with me story, they've been trying for a long time, and that's why it doesn't feel as satisfying when someone does say, have you thought about trying a little harder? And it doesn't seem to go over well. And this is really big when you talk about issues with sexuality, where either the individual or somebody in the individual's family comes out as gay or transgender, or or someone, their spouse has had an affair, or someone dies, or all of these experiences that seem to be different, that don't quite necessarily fit within this theological box, and where people start to employ that "what's wrong with me" story. And so what can be difficult is, and this is where I feel like one of the key pieces of this is somebody that hasn't had that experience, so someone in that stage 3 experience, and where that has worked for them, that they really do feel like they are helping when they say, you just have to hang in there, or when they start to say, I've been through hard things too. And so that's where I feel like, we're going to lay the path to this here throughout the next hour, or 45 minutes left. But where you start to see that I really do feel that at the core, we're as humans, we're trying our best, but we only have our own experiences to go off of. Just like I'm sure that there are many of you hearing this right now, and you're having different experiences as well. You might have a lot of what I call the yeah buts. Well, yeah, but they probably do need to pray more, but how dare, this leader just tell them that without hearing them? Because we all have these different experiences, including the leaders themselves. So this is going to lead to, let's go on a little side tangent here. We're going to talk about empathy versus sympathy. We're going to touch on that one briefly. I'm going to get into acceptance and commitment therapy, and then one of my favorite phrases, psychological reactants. So we're going to touch on those 3 now, and then I promise you we'll get back to Fowler stages of faith. So in this stage 3, I think that kind of sets the table for what we're going to talk about now. So I feel like I am probably preaching to the choir, pun somewhat intended, of empathy versus sympathy. But with the professionals that are in this room. But so often I feel like that is a concept that I really like to explain to clients in a nutshell. The difference between empathy and sympathy really is emotion. Empathy meaning experiencing someone else's feelings, and then sympathy, on the other hand, understanding someone else's suffering. That sympathy can be more cognitive of nature, and it keeps a certain distance. And I'll make it so fast, but on my podcast I often give an example of, oh my goodness, I'm also very open about my ADD. Here it just came. I was going to say in the introduction, here's the big challenge. My one thing was my wife wants action photos of me speaking. So there's a bounty on these. So if anyone has a decent photo, they share it with me after. I have gear, my podcast swag or gear that I will send you. So every now and again, maybe I'll do one of these. And then the cameras should be flashing there. Okay, why did I insert that? Oh, empathy and sympathy on the podcast. Okay, so I like to tell a story to illustrate that, of the way that it was best told to me was that if you are walking along a path and you see someone that is down inside of a hole, and you walk by them and you say, man, what's going on there? And if if they say, I'm stuck, I fell in this hole, I can't get out, sympathy would look like saying, that really stinks, I am so sorry, but I kind of got to go. And so I feel like that can be sympathy, and we can understand at times where that may not feel like a connection. Empathy is jumping down in that hole and then, saying, all right, tell me about your experience in holes. Like, what is this like for you? Are you afraid of dirt? Do you want to climb out? And it's like, tell me, I'm right here beside you. I want to join you in this experience. And I feel like that really speaks to empathy, that is something that is a very key component. And even more so, I think what can be really difficult is one of the best illustrations of this when I was in grad school is I had a professor, and she stood on one side of the room and had somebody stand on the other side, and there were some chairs in the way, and she told the person to get to the other side and just said, okay, now go left and go right and move and get around. And then the person gets to the other side, and then my professor said, all right, how'd that feel? And the person said, fine, I guess. I'm here. And that a lot of times is more of what feels like sympathy. Empathy can be now going over and standing with that person and saying, where do we want to go? Well, I want to get to the other side of the room. And you come upon the first table that's in front of you, and it's like, okay, what are your thoughts? What do you want to do here? Were you attacked by a band of table makers as a kid? Do you like to go over tables, under tables? Do you want to move the table? And so empathy really is trying to understand what that person's experience is, and then saying, all right, what do we do with that? And so I really feel like that's significant. Now, if we go back into the concept of that stage 3 experience that Fowler talks about, you can maybe see now that a lot of times when somebody is saying, hey, I know what you're going through, I've been there, that if we really look at what empathy is, that might be more of sympathy than empathy. I jotted down in a note here, one of my favorite experiences with this was doing a training of a lot of ecclesiastical leaders, and I had a 50-something-year-old, such a well-meaning person, raise his hand and ask for my professional opinion on how to get through to somebody when they just don't want to hear what this person had to say. And so I asked to give me detail, and he explained that he was talking with a single mother of 3, And he said, and I told her, I know what that's like, because he had at one point had 3 kids. So he was such a good sport, but very true story. So then I said, well, so hang on. So, she didn't want to hear what I was like when you were a young mother of 3, So, I mean, even when this person means well, and he says, I know what you're going through, that doesn't resonate with someone who hasn't had that shared experience. So even when we're trying to be empathetic at times, that can be a challenge, which I think can, if you start to see how that would apply when we're talking about this stage 3 experience with a leader, that even when we are aware of empathy, it can still be really difficult to have empathy for somebody else. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. That leads to our next thing, which is... on that, psychological reactants. And I don't know, this is one where I almost feel silly that I wasn't aware of this until more than 10 or so years into my practice. But if you're not familiar with psychological reactants, it's the instant negative reaction of being told what to do. And psychologists really started studying this a lot in the 80s, and there's a belief that it's this innate desire to push back so that we won't be dominated by an alpha society or kind of roll over or give in to someone that maybe doesn't mean the best for us. And one of the coolest studies that was done on psychological reactants was done with a jury. And with that jury, there was some evidence given that was given in the wrong way. So it was inadmissible evidence. So a judge said, don't use that evidence in your decision. So then in this particular study, half of the jurors were then lectured for about 10 minutes by the judge of reminding them why you cannot use that evidence in your decision. It is, you cannot do it. And then another half was never spoken to about it again. So, maybe not surprisingly, the group that was lectured on you cannot use this evidence, it was 70% of them used the evidence in making their decision. So we just have this innate, when we're told what to do, pushback, and that is that psychological reactance. I always say that a teenager's reactance muscles are so strong. You can come home and want to give your kid $50 cash, and his first response is going to be like, back off, Dad, until he realizes, oh, I want that $50. But that immediate reaction is so strong. And if you think about thought suppression, that is psychological reactance in action. If I say, don't think of a white polar bear with a green baseball cap on, maybe backwards, probably all thought about it right now. And so that is our own brain saying, I'll do whatever I want. And so that's what's so fascinating about psychological reactance. So I hope you can see I'm trying to lay all these things out together. So if you've got this stage 3 experience and you have someone that is going through things that are unique to that person, and now you have someone, even when they mean their best and they're saying, no, I hear you, I've been through tough times too, that doesn't necessarily feel like they feel that connection with that person because of things like psychological reactance. So now go back to that point where somebody's saying, hey, I need you to really buckle down. I need you to be more devout. I need you to pray more. I need you to read your scriptures more. I need you to serve more. Even when somebody wants to do that, at their core, that psychological reactance is still kind of pushing back. And so that's where I feel like let's talk about acceptance and commitment therapy. And I'm just curious, by show of hands, how many of you are familiar with ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy? Okay, and also, are there a lot of you here that are or maybe CBT therapists? Okay, perfect. I'm really not going to be bagging on CBT. I really promise. It's going to sound that way for a minute, but I really am not, because I was a CBT therapist for years, and I went to an ACT training, and it really did kind of change my practice and a lot of the ways that I work. CBT and ACT are both behavior-based therapies, and they differ primarily in the view that they take around thoughts. And so whereas CBT works by helping you identify and change negative or destructive thoughts, ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, so I'll just call it ACT from here on out, holds the pain and discomfort we kind of acknowledge that pain and discomfort are a fact of life, and that we're going to have a lot of emotions, and that we need to learn how to work with, understand, relate to emotion in order to live a more happy and healthy, fulfilling life. So rather than trying to change those thoughts and emotions, of learning how to acknowledge them, recognize them, accept them, and it is done with some things like some mindfulness principles and some diffusion techniques. And so even when I heard it at first, I thought it was a little too woo-woo, as some of them say. But now, to this point, it's really changed the way that I do my work. So as a CBT therapist, I became really good at identifying the stinking thinking and the ants, the automatic negative thoughts. But I want to share with you a quick client story that when I was taking the ACT training, so I was a CBT therapist taking the ACT training, and I feel like this example really will show you why I feel it's important, especially when talking about things like faith journey, faith crisis, mental health. So at that time, I was working with somebody. He was in his late 20s. In his youth, he had been around 400 pounds, and he was half of that when I was working with him. And he had a lot of social anxiety, and he had a goal. He really he had a goal of connecting with others, and he would go to dances and activities. And so when he would walk in the room, people would look at him. They would look, and he would think they're making fun of me. And so as CBT therapists, we would say, okay, those are automatic negative thoughts, or that's that stinking thinking. That's that thought around, you feeling like, all right, what's wrong with me? I'm broken. And we would work on those. What are some other things that they might be thinking? because the thought leads to the emotion leads to the behavior. So we would take that thought, and then we would say, maybe they think you look great. Maybe they think you're exuding confidence. And he would say, yeah. And that would lead to an emotion of confidence, then a behavior of he's like, I got this. And then he would come back in another week, and we would process, and he would say, that didn't work. What's wrong with me? I am broken. And I would say, no, we got to come up with a different thought. That'll lead to a happy emotion and a behavior. You've got this. And so I was realizing I was having a lot of those type of experiences. So I'm at this ACT training, and this is where the ACT model, and I told him straight up, it's guinea pig time. But ACT model said, okay, actually, you have the thoughts that people are looking at you and making judgments of you because you spent a decade at 400 pounds where everybody did look at you and they did make fun of you, and that must have been really hard. So ACT starts with an acceptance of that you have the thoughts, feelings, and emotions you do because you are the only version of you that has ever walked the face of the earth. And I go big on this stuff whenever I get to speak about it. But you're a combination of your nature and your nurture and your birth order and your abandonment, and your rejection, and your hopes and dreams and fears and people that have died and your parents have moved, and that's what makes you who you are, and that is why you think, feel, and act the way you do from an ACT standpoint. So then that reframes things so well. And now I go back to when I said earlier that when people are coming into my office, they're saying, man, what's wrong with me? I'm broken. Even when it comes to this faith crisis or faith journey, it's, no, you're not broken. You're a human who's had the experiences that you've had. So now let's take a look at those feelings and thoughts and emotions. So that was a real significant part for me and with working with this client of where, really feeling like that ACT model just resonated. It helped. So once he could accept that he had those thoughts and feelings that people were looking at him because he's the only version of him that's ever walked the face of the earth, and he had those experiences, so he feels that way. Now what do we do with it? So now we can accept that those are his thoughts and feelings, and in ACT, you can even make room for them. You can learn this concept called expansion, and invite those feelings to come along with you, and all those things that are a lot harder than making it sound like it's so easy. Within 15 minutes he was changed. It wasn't that. But the first step is being able to accept that he's human. That's the way he feels. But one of the coolest things there, and I hope you're starting to see that I really want to then be able to link these things back to the faith journey or faith transition or faith crisis or whatever we want to call it, is that he had a value of a connection. He had a value of love. He wanted to act on those values, but then his brain was protecting him. His brain was saying, no, those people are going to make fun of you. Those people are going to think that they're looking at you because they know something. They know that you used to be this completely different person. So with ACT, you aren't even arguing if that's a true or false statement. And that's so empowering. You accept those thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And so now we're saying, okay, maybe, but we're not even arguing if that's a true or false statement. Is it a productive thought toward your value of connection? And so you can start to see those things as well when you start to work in terms of a faith journey. When someone maybe has a value of connection, a value of empathy, a value of authenticity, but then they come upon information or knowledge or experiences that are hard and they're really challenging to them. So then they think, man, why am I thinking these things? What's wrong with me? Nothing. You're human. And so with ACT, you really start to look at what's that person's values. And I think one of the fascinating things, and I'll do one more thing here on ACT, then we'll get back to Fowler stages of faith. But ACT acknowledges that our brains really are designed as a don't get killed device. If you really look at an evolutionary biological model of the brain, it used to just be don't get killed and live, and that's the goal. Now we have all of these other things that we think about. So we're constantly worrying about things that most of the things will never happen. But our brain thinks it's doing us a favor by being worried or anxious about all these things that are going on in our life as if it can predict or protect us from all of these unknowns. But in reality, what it can do is keep us kind of stuck. So if you look at the brain as a don't get killed device, oftentimes I always say, man, bless my brain's little pink squishy heart. It really means me well when it wants to keep me from doing something scary, or because the brain is designed, it wants the path of least resistance. In the world of ACT, we often talk about, the brain it knows what it knows. And even if people aren't happy, it knows what this feels like, what your right now feels like. So if this guy goes out and puts himself out there and meets somebody and they get married and he has kids and all these sort of things, his brain's saying, you may not be able to do that very well. Like, that might really be scary. So if I can get you to hook to they still think you're kind of overweight, then you don't even have to go in that room. You don't have to meet people. You're not going to end up getting married or having kids, or, why don't you just come back here, path of least resistance, and we'll worry about things later. In ACT, we talk a lot about a couple of concepts. One is called experiential avoidance. It's the old, I'll do it later. Experiential avoidance occurs when we're acting on things that really, they're either scary, it's the unknown, or at times if we're acting on things that really aren't part of our core value. And I feel like that's one of the things that's really fascinating once you learn about the concept of experiential avoidance. That how many times do we not do something, or we'll do it tomorrow, we'll do it Monday, we'll do it next year, and it's really because it's something that isn't part of our core values. There's another concept of ACT that is called a socially compliant goal. And this is another piece that's fascinating. A socially compliant goal is something that you're doing because you think that you have to. It's something you think you need to do, or someone else will be disappointed, or you'll let someone else down. So oftentimes, and this is why I hope you're following me here, but in that ACT model, you're the only version of you, and because of your experiences, you have a particular set of values or things that matter to you. But oftentimes, we're still trying to show up as somebody that we think we're supposed to be. And so as we try to show up as somebody that we think that we're supposed to be, we're often following these socially compliant goals, where we're doing things because we think that we need to, or we'll let somebody else down. And when we're living our life based on one of these socially compliant goals, that often leads to this experiential avoidance, where, I'll just do it later. And too often we find ourselves in that realm. Let me open another bottle of water. I was so scared that I was drinking somebody else's here for a minute. The brain is a don't get killed device, so we checked that one, and we got the experiential avoidance and the socially compliant goals. So let's go back now to stages of faith. So we just got through stage 3, faith. So now we've identified, I hope you can see where I was going with that, where someone, because they identify that this is their experience, they're human, they have all these thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Somebody tells them what to do, they've got that psychological reactance, and that those things all come into play then of someone that then starts to feel like that there's maybe a conflict with their community, their faith community, their family even, their tribe, their people. And so that often leads to what Fowler calls stage 4, which he calls individuative and reflective faith. And he said this stage is often characterized by angst and struggle as the individual takes personal responsibility for their beliefs or feelings. Religious or spiritual beliefs can take on a greater complexity and shades of nuance, and there's a greater sense of open-mindedness, which can at the same time open up the individual to potential conflicts as different beliefs or traditions collide. And so stage 4 can be a really tough stage. It's often begun in young adulthood, and it's when people start seeing outside of their box and often realize that there are other boxes. And they begin to critically examine their beliefs on their own, and they often become disillusioned with their former faith. And here's the irony, and this is why I wanted to set that stage, of people that are in this 3, and again, it's not a linear, one's better than the other thing, but if somebody, as their experiences line up in that stage 3, as Fowler talks about, they're happy, they're okay in there. But if somebody now has struggled in that 3, and now they hit this individuative and reflective faith, that they often, ironically, stage 3 people or leaders in their life usually think that stage 4 people have become backsliders. And so often this is the fight or the struggle that I get, or primarily it's people coming into my office in this stage 4, they can be angry. They can feel like they've been let down. They can feel like they've been lied to. They can feel all of these things. And so a stage 3 person can often say, hey, don't read those things, or don't talk to those people, or don't associate with those people, so you can see where that conflict can come. And now we've got reactants going between oftentimes somebody in a stage 3 or a stage 4 setting, and you've got sometimes that empathy isn't quite there, and so I feel like you can see often where that struggle occurs, and this is where I feel like. where people really do both of them. Even a stage 4 person, when they're angry, often want to say, wait, but you don't understand, to the stage 3 person. But neither person is really listening to the other person. They may have sympathy. I'm sorry for what you're going through, but you just need to, both sides are saying that. And now here comes the reactants. I need to do what? I'm not going to do what you want me to do. I'll do the opposite of it. And so let me kind of get into this stage 5. But before we do that, this is something I really want to lay out. And I love talking about abandonment and attachment and how that shows up in adulthood. And I think this is significant, the way that we've kind of laid things out up to this point. So let's start literally from birth. When a baby enters the world, they are screaming and crying because they want their needs met. And I think this is so significant to start literally from birth and to move forward and to look at that 0 to 2-year-old baby. They express themselves, they cry, and they're held, they're fed, they're cleaned. And so they are programmed to say, if I emote, if I express myself, my needs get met. That is a factory setting. So now when you get into that 2 to 10 or 7, 8, I like to joke and say, welcome to the world of abandonment. So, their brains are programmed to say, I am center of the universe, I express myself, and everybody immediately reacts. Now, 2 to 7, 8, now they have language skills, and they're saying, I would like to go to Disneyland, please. And parents are saying, no, or I would like to have candy before dinner, and they're hearing no. And so to that person that's coming from a factory setting of, but I want it, like I asked for that, you're supposed to meet my needs. It's kind of fascinating when you look at it that way. And this is the part where every kid then is an egocentric, unempathetic, not of concern of their caregivers around them, what they're going through. I jokingly saying little narcissists is what they are. But that's okay. That's who they are, because that's the factory setting. But then this is why it's so fascinating to understand that, because here's where I say now 2 things kind of branch off. We got an abandonment track and we've got an attachment track. So now from that moment forward, the attachment piece is, all right, how do I show up to get my needs met? Because if I don't get my needs met, it means death. Abandonment equals death. That's kind of the programming. So this is where, I don't know if you remember when we would hear that a kid's going to do anything just to get their attention, whether it's positive or negative. And I would always say that. I thought I had a pretty good idea. But when you really look at it from that birth on, that how does a kid show up to get their needs met? Are they the star athlete? Are they the peacemaker? Are they are they really emotionally needy? Are they angry? Because even the angry kid knows that if I'm being angry, they've got that programming that if I'm getting in trouble, at least somebody sees me and they're aware of me. So I'm most likely going to get fed and live. So, you really start to see what that attachment piece looks like moving forward. So then as we go forward into adulthood, we still find ourselves trying to show up and get our needs met by the way that we present. Right now I'm trying to sound super smart so you guys will think I'm cool, But we really, we want to become our authentic self. So you got that attachment piece. Now, then over on the abandonment track, this one's fascinating too. So as people start to get older, they do start to feel like, because they're coming from a factory setting of they are the center of the universe and people respond to their needs, what abandonment looks like moving forward is if people don't meet my needs, if they don't react the way I anticipate them doing so, then it's my fault, that something must be wrong with me, that, again, I must be unlovable, I must be broken. And so we carry those childhood abandonment and attachment wounds into adulthood, and now all of a sudden, when somebody's not responding the way we want them to, we're like, it's me. That whole I'm broken. And then we're trying to figure out, well, how do I do this? How do I show up so that my spouse will want to think I'm cool, my ecclesiastical leader, my boss, and all of these are, these are our childhood defense and wounding that we bring forth into adulthood. So then we feel like we're not being true to ourselves, which kind of goes back to that when we're living these socially compliant goals or trying to become somebody that we think other people will like. And so, boy, this is a topic for a whole other day, but then that leads to the ultimate goal of differentiation, being able to, have our own identity and confidence and still maintain a connection with others. Like, that's a whole fascinating thing there. But so that attachment and abandonment stuff, I think, is so important too, because as part of that, I feel like that stage 4 anger is sometimes it's a period of self-discovery of where somebody is, again, they've struggled in that 3 box. They've felt like, what's wrong with me? They've started to maybe feel like, okay, I identify with some concepts of maybe outside of that box. But now, now they feel these abandonment wounds, or they feel like this attachment. If I'm not angry, or if I don't show up and show somebody how much I'm hurt, then they're not going to care. But those are still our childhood abandonment and attachment wounds moving forward. So stage 5, this one's pretty fascinating. So Fowler talks about 5, he calls it conjunctive faith. A person at this stage acknowledges paradoxes and mysteries attendant on transcendent values. This can cause a person to move beyond the conventional religious traditions or beliefs that they may have inherited from previous stages of development. And a resolution of the conflicts of this stage occurs when the person's able to hold a multidimensional perspective that acknowledges truth as something that maybe cannot be articulated through a particular statement of faith. So I often summarize that one by saying, this is a stage where many people begin to realize the limits of logic, or they start to accept paradoxes in life. And they begin to see life more as a mystery, and they can return to sacred and symbols, but they may not feel like they need to be stuck in a theological box. And so stage 5 can be something, and I think there's and I know we're going to run out of time, but Fowler talks about it's difficult for people to reach this stage before midlife. I think that's significant, because I feel like a lot of the population that we work with now are younger people that are starting to have these faith journeys or faith crises. And I believe Fowler wasn't really aware of what the internet would look or do. Not that, he died in 2015, but I feel like the more that people have access to information, I think where he would maybe speak to this is so many people have had enough positive experiences with their faith community in that stage 3 that oftentimes when people can get into this stage 5, that's where he talks about you can accept some of the mysteries and paradoxes of life and return to a faith community without feel like being stuck in a theological box, with feeling like I don't have to show up and be a certain person, but I get to show up and I am a certain person. So there is a stage 6, but it's I kind of joke about this one. Universalizing faith, it says it's rarely achieved because people at stage 6 are in full service of others without worries about other people. And this is where people often talk about it's Jesus, it's Buddha, it's Gandhi, it's Mother Teresa. And I got mad this morning when some car got in front of me. So I know I'm not hitting stage 6 anytime soon. But it's in the stage 5. Let me just go through a couple of things that I think are significant. And then I really will just stop, and maybe we can leave the last 10 minutes if there's some questions or that sort of thing. But here's some things that I think are interesting. That, again, I kind of touched on that, the need to have spent some time maybe with successful experiences and with your faith community or in the stage 3, and sometimes in order to maybe find that stage 5 as a place where they want to be. And now this is purely from an ACT framework, is that I do wonder at times if stage 4, I've worked with a lot of people that come in and they're angry. Maybe I didn't work this into the beginning, but I've worked with a few hundred individuals through faith journey, faith crisis, and 200 or 300 couples, mixed faith marriage couples. And so I really do start to feel like you see some patterns that I think maybe we all start to see in our practices. But oftentimes when I get someone in my office and they're in a stage 3, kind of an angry place, and that's where I will hear the whatever, don't you dare tell me to pray or read my scriptures or that sort of thing. And I often find that in my particular situation where people will tell me, I don't even want to tell you the things that I know. And I always say, please do, because I've heard everything, and I would love to hear something new. And oftentimes just even having somebody experience that as a clinician, we're willing to sit with them in that. It's like, no, I'm here for you. And I think that so often we really do want to just oftentimes know that there is a way, that there is hope. And so where I'm going with that is sometimes I feel like stage 4, when I've worked with people through a stage 4 experience where they have left a particular faith community or that sort of thing. And again, my job is to meet them where they're at, but I will often find that isn't necessarily where they don't necessarily feel like that was the ultimate goal. That really, I believe a lot of us just want to be heard. We want to be accepted. We want to be understood. We all have that need to have a tribe or a community. And so oftentimes it's really hard when we feel like we're feeling disconnected or rejected by our community. And so I'm pausing because this is, here's my controversial take, okay? And that's why I framed it from an ACT framework. So, because I feel like oftentimes I've noticed that maybe the stage 4 might actually be a bit of the path of least resistance. Now, somebody that's struggling, that sounds unempathetic by me, but hear me out, is where oftentimes when people get to this stage 5 in whatever the belief system is, that it does look a little bit like what what all the kids are saying these days, buffet style, where that's where it says, okay, here's some things I really like about my faith community or my faith tradition, but the reason I say that 4 may be the path of least resistance is because the great unknown, the scary part is that 5, because when someone's grown up being told the buffet piece is not okay, that then I feel like sometimes that's why the path of least resistance wants to exit on stage 4. But when sometimes people, again, step into their own, calm, confident, energetic self, differentiated, understanding, I got to get rid of my childhood abandonment and attachment wounds, that I'm not broken, I'm made up of all of my nature, nurture, birth order, abandonment DNA, and I have the values that I have because I'm a human being, that as people kind of step into that role, that then oftentimes then they can recognize areas of their tribe or their community or their people that they still love or appreciate or identify with. Because often I feel like that stage 4, let's get into the world of cognitive dissonance. I mean, our brains, we already identified, they think they can just chill and live forever, but they also love to go to the black or white, all or nothing thinking. So it's kind of like, well, I can't do that. It's like this or that, all or nothing. So oftentimes I find that people will then immediately kind of get angry and go down the stage 4 route because the fear of, well, I can't be nuanced. I can't, it's either black or white. I'm either in or out. And I feel like that is the brain trying to make sense with, that's why we talk about cognitive distortions all the time. There's my hot take. But then oftentimes when people get a little more comfortable in this stage 5, and that stage 5, again, it isn't a linear thing. It doesn't mean that now they return to their faith community. Some do, many do, others don't, But when they feel like they're, from a mental health aspect, but I find that that's where people start to have more of an acceptance of that they are, they're okay, that they're human, that they're this makeup of all these experiences. But when people often get comfortable in that 5, they often discover, to them at least, that even in the stage 3 world, there were buffet-style beliefs, sometimes called leadership roulette, where people can live a mile away from a friend, have 2 different ecclesiastical leaders do the same thing, get in trouble for the same thing, and in one scenario be told that, okay, your privileges are restricted, and then a mile over with another leader be told, hey, you need to do more, you need to serve more, you need to show up more. And so that's the part where sometimes when people get to that acceptance, and this as Fowler talks about that stage 5, life is full of mystery and paradox, I can return to my faith community without being stuck in a theological box. Oftentimes they realize, wow, so maybe there is a little bit of that buffet-style stuff going on everywhere, and how fascinating. I often hear the concepts of social capital and rites of passage. I like those when it comes to that people want to be able to maintain a connection with family or build on that social capital, but often they feel like it's lost when they leave that stage 3 box. Rites of passage, one client told me once that she didn't want her kids' rites of passage of just simply to be going to school prom, that she wanted to be able to participate and attend confirmations and baptisms and other significant events without feeling unwanted. Because again, we want to know, or we want to feel a sense of belonging. We want to know that we're part of the group, because built into us is if we're abandoned by the group, we're going to be devoured by saber-toothed tigers or wolves, or it's still kind of there in our DNA. And I will be so honest that I'm not completely sure where I heard this, which is such a horrible thing to do when you're presenting at a conference. But I believe the sentiment was very solid, and that it was that every belief system starts with an unorthodox belief. So if you just take Christianity in general, you've got Jesus spreading a new message, unorthodox, or in Mormonism, Joseph Smith, an unorthodox belief system. So one researcher, and again the name escapes me, I think it was Chaim Potok, but said that inevitably there becomes a movement around orthodoxy, and that it was, and Fowler did not speak to this, so I'm combining these, but I believe what Fowler would say is it's almost as if there's a 3, and I don't even want to say versus 5, but there's a 3 and a 5, and so you have a more orthodox, like look at someone maybe like the Amish or Mennonites or Hasidic Jews, where if they decide that they are going to be more orthodox, you maybe do have the horse and buggies or the side curls or those sort of things, and where in this presentation that I remember, more of a stage 5 movement, look at maybe Catholicism and their view on the Holy Communion, where you have somebody standing right beside the other person, and one feels that the wafer and wine is transfigured into flesh and blood of Christ, and the person right beside them feels like it's It's just a wafer and grape juice, but they're happy to be there amongst their people. So some believe that is kind of that a faith community will often move toward orthodoxy or more of this stage 5 kind of a view. And again, I didn't have as much data as I would like there. So what have we learned today? People are made up of their own experiences. We all have this desire to attach and feel loved, feel a part of something, and and I really feel like that concept or that acceptance and commitment therapy espouses of that you are the only version of you is so significant, because I feel like that leads to those concepts of psychological reactants, somebody telling you what to do, or somebody even saying, no, I know what you're going through. I mean, I got to tell you, as a dad, it hit me not too many years ago of where, my son has literally grown up with technology his entire life. So, I don't build credibility when I'm telling him about the times that I ran around without a phone. It's not like he says, tell me more, Dad. It's just not the case. So I feel like that's a significant piece of then just understanding what that empathy. I didn't get to the EFT portion, the Sue Johnson. I really feel like that's just the way to have the conversations. Sue Johnson, in the EFT world, there's a lot of, instead of you need to understand, it's tell me more. Yeah. Do I really? Yeah. Ooh. You guys can leave if you want, but 2:45? Okay. Do you have questions? Like I can start do that, or I can give you a 2 or 3 minute overview of what I feel like about the EFT piece, and then we can do questions. Or okay, so and I really I'm going to sound like self-promoting, but so I love EFT, and I did just I have a marriage course that I've really been working hard to put together, and I really feel grateful to. I've got what I call these 4 pillars of a connected conversation, and I really feel like this is significant, and these are based 100% on EFT. I want you to know that. But so my first pillar is that it's the assumption of good intentions. To no one wakes up in the morning and thinks, how can I hurt my fill in the blank, my spouse, my parent, my whatever. And I love speaking to clinicians because I think you'll see where I'm going here quickly, that if somebody is withdrawn, then they're withdrawn because they don't, they didn't wake up and say, I'll withdraw from my spouse, and that'll show them. It's that they don't feel like they know how to be heard, maybe unless they withdraw. Or if a teenager is just angry, that I have to assume that isn't their goal to just blast their parents all day. It's they don't feel like they're heard unless they show up that way. And I think that goes back to those attachment things I talked about earlier. But the reason I say that one is, even when somebody's having a faith journey, a faith crisis, or the things they say, I think it's so important to start with that first pillar, that they're not doing that to hurt someone. They're not doing that to get back at their parents or their religious leader. That automatically puts us in a little bit more of an empathetic frame or mindset. And then my second pillar is that you cannot put across the message that you're wrong. And I really feel like these 4 pillars I'm going to share they're a little bit all or nothing. Here I just trashed all or nothing, but now I'm going to say this is the good version of all or nothing. Because I feel like when you look at when conversations don't go well, you can tie it back to probably breaking one of these 4 pillars. And so that second one though is you can't say you're wrong. So let's say we've all right, let's say my teenage son is saying he doesn't want to be a member of the church anymore. A lot of times parents are like, oh my gosh, what have I done? It's like, okay, no, we have to meet them. They assume good intentions, that they are not trying to hurt me. That leads me into a little bit more empathy. Then if they express something, I can't say, that's ridiculous. Because again, that's going to shut down the conversation right there. And there's even pretty fascinating ways that we put the message of you're wrong. There's the easy ones, like saying, that's ridiculous, you're wrong, I've already heard this before, are you serious? Do you know how that affects me? I mean, you can go on and on about them. One of the fascinating ones is where, like I'm giving a talk in my congregation in a week, and the one you often hear there is when somebody's like, oh man, I don't know if I'm ready, and a spouse will say, you are, like you can do hard things, but if you really think about it, man, bless their heart, that's a nice thing to say, but you're basically saying, no, you're wrong, like you're fine, don't worry about it. And so it's really interesting when that second pillar I feel is so significant, because if you can't, even if you know the person is wrong. I mean, and I mean it too. I mean, my wife and I, we laugh about this stuff all the time where she'll know that I forgot something. And instead of saying, look, dummy, you forgot it, it's, oh, wow, okay, I thought you had said this one thing. But if you don't remember saying that, then I can understand why you're frustrated or whatever. And that's where I'm like, oh, okay, I must have forgot something, because I mean, it's going to lead, you're going to lean in a little bit more to have this conversation. But when you tell somebody they're wrong, there's that reactance. So that leads to the third pillar, which is questions before comments. And that one used to be Stephen Covey's Seek First to Understand, before being understood, but then I felt like I needed my own version of that one. Because true story, for a year, I thought that was in the Bible. And I would have people come in, and I would say, and I thought it had to have been Paul, right? I was like, as Paul said. And then one time I Googled it, and it was Stephen Covey. So very embarrassed about that, but I'm being authentic. But so questions before comments. So if you've assumed good intentions, you haven't told the person they're wrong, that leads to, tell me more. What's that like for you? Empathetic statements. They don't come naturally. And one of the hardest things in that third pillar is we so often want to make sure that we get heard, and then we're willing to listen. So let's say that you could do pillar one. All right, my wife, says I'm withdrawn. And then I can't tell her she's wrong. But then I say, okay, but let me just tell you first, you have no idea how hard I've been working to, because then that's going to shut the conversation down. So the third pillar is ask questions. So then if somebody is coming to you, faith journey, faith crisis, again, not trying to hurt you. Thank you. Not trying to hurt you. Can't say that's ridiculous, and then say, tell me more. And then the fourth pillar is then staying present, not going into victim mode. Because too often then, that's where then somebody can make it through all three of those pillars, and they can say, well, I guess I'm the world's worst father, or I guess I'll just never try anything again, and because then we're going into victim mode, and we're wanting that person to come rescue us. Oh, no, you're great, that kind of thing. So I just go over those quickly because I feel like there needs to be the framework of how to communicate when you're having these conversations around faith crisis and mental health. So I really do feel like, I joked with my wife where, she's like, see, look at me. I'm so afraid of sounding narcissistic. That's a big population I work with as well. But I really feel like these things they fit so well together to be able to have the conversations. And I found over the years that the more that you can have people just continuing to feel heard, feel like they matter, having those conversations, then that's where we can have these, you can make change. Like then people are actually listening to each other, and that's what can really drive change. So, all right, we have 14 minutes. So I'd love any questions. Yeah. Yeah, it's you can't put off the message that you're wrong. And I hope and I think Jeremy will vouch for this. I really am trying not to self-promote, but I have a podcast called The Virtual Couch, and I've done a lot of these on the pillars, the 4 pillars, and faith. I mean, I've got all the stages of faith stuff on there, and so I love talking about this stuff. I really do. So I would encourage you to go there. And then you can email me through my website and say you were here, and I will send you. I've got the secret document that lists all the pillars and empathetic statements and all this kind of stuff too. Yeah, question. It was the virtual. Oh, the virtual couch. Yeah, the virtual couch. Yeah, and so Tony at TonyOverbay.com. Yeah, please. I mean, I will send you. You guys are you're doing the work, so I would love to provide any of this, not saying then that you must do these things, but I really feel like it helps a lot. I've probably worked with, when I was doing the 4 pillar stuff, I think I counted at one point, I probably worked with about a little over 1,000 couples, so I've really feel like it's field tested, I really, because I think what it does is it allows people to have conversations, and I find that, and if you do couples therapy, you probably have that experience where I feel like EFT, and then I've tried to implement these, make these 4 pillars real tangible, because people are so used to not communicating effectively that it's fascinating. It's what a difference it is when they are now communicating, because I'm surprised at how much people don't know about their spouse or their kid, or they don't know about what that journey's been like from a spiritual standpoint or any of those things, because that's why I say those pillars, you shut somebody down so quickly when you're telling them, oh, well, don't read that, or you shouldn't think that. So then people just eventually feel like, well, it's not even worth it for me to have this conversation. So then they don't even try to express that they might have a different opinion. And so then when somebody finally does feel like, okay, I've had enough, I have to just get this off my chest, then it typically comes across as, they blindside someone. And then that person feels like, well, where did this come from? Well, it came from maybe sometimes a decade or more of working through this struggle, maybe in that stage 3 area, or getting into that stage 4 and just not feeling heard. Yeah. All right, we got 10 more minutes. Other questions? Yeah. Okay. But I kind of do. So, when you have the 4 pillars, yeah.
You are trying to tell somebody that they're not wrong, like not listen, But what if policy and their life is being affected by what this person believes?
Yeah.
This person believes,
No, absolutely. And I love that, because, and I think I'm glad you asked that question, because I do make it sound so simple, but oh yeah, thank you. So I feel like the question was, the pillar, the assumption of good intentions or not telling somebody they're wrong, but what if they really are in an environment or a situation or something that is maybe harmful? Or is that kind of what you're...
Yeah, kind of like this is just a controversial, like one believes that gay marriage is not
Mm-hmm.
right, and the other one believes it is. Who's right or wrong? And that one belief is the one directing policy,
Yeah.
and they're right.
Absolutely. And I feel like the reason why I refer to this, it's a framework, is because I feel like we don't get to have conversations when we don't. That's why I feel like the significance of this framework. So there are topics that there is going to be a lot of tension. And I feel like we're so worried about, things going into contention that we avoid tension altogether. And then when we finally do show up to try to have a difficult conversation, I feel like that's where things become so elevated so quickly, because we already feel like we're not going to be heard. And so, in a situation like that, let me give you one that I've had recently. So if I have someone in my office and they're transgender. So, and let's say that I will do some hypothetical here, but let's say it's early 20s and parents say, okay, we're going to pay for the therapy, just fix them. And so then person comes in and I'm going to meet that person wherever they're at. However they present to me, I want to hear. Tell me more. You are a product of your nature and nurture and birth order and abandonment and all that stuff, all the acceptance and commitment therapy things. I'm grateful somebody's there. And what is your value-based goal? Where are you headed? So then I get a parent, and this person tells me, yeah, I'd love for you to talk to my parents. Well, the parents just want to come in and tell me all the things that they're doing wrong and all the things I need to know to change them. And so I often say that, hey, the goal right now is just to be heard. The goal is to adhere to this framework so that then we can, if people want to have a conversation, even if they have completely different ideas, that we just want to at least be able to start from a basis of expression. And so, and this is going to sound like I'm being manipulative and negative, and I promise you that is not my intention. But I have often shared with somebody in that, and let's just say if that's a really strong stage 3 parental unit, where I say, okay, they already know that you're going to tell them that you disagree. They already know that you've been trying to tell them that you think what they're doing is wrong and all those things. Almost an acceptance of that. What would that look like to say? Tell me what that's like. Tell me more. Tell me about your experience. Tell me how long you felt this way. Tell me, because even if that parent then, does believe that some of the things that they're expressing maybe aren't necessarily true, or that experience was different, the only way to even have a conversation around that is to say, tell me what that was like for you, and to provide a safe environment for that person to be able to communicate. Because then here's what that looks like, is then it's like, I really appreciate you sharing that. That would be hard. I can understand that, or thank you so much. Man, I feel like in those times, this was our experience, but I appreciate you sharing yours. Like, that's the way to get to more of an open dialogue, but it still doesn't mean that people are going to then, resolve and live happily ever after. So my goal is just trying to set up the framework to have conversations, because I already know what that looks like when people shut each other down. So I don't know if that even answers it. Yeah, Jeremy.
Just dovetailing on that, can you walk us through a dissolution of a relationship when you do this and one side just like, sorry, that's not going to work, I'm out?
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's where the differentiation piece comes in. That's kind of where I mentioned that earlier. It's difficult. There is going to be tension. And so differentiation is being able to really stay in your logical brain and not get caught up in the emotional response, and being able to still maintain a connection with somebody. That is ultimately differentiation. If you go look at Bowen has some pretty fascinating stuff where he said that even the father of differentiation said that on a good day, he was partially differentiated, because we still carry so much of our emotional baggage forward with us into our adulthood. So what that can look like is somebody being able to now say, this is who I am. That's a differentiated individual. I have the thoughts, feelings, and emotions I do because I am human. I'm aware that now I'm trying to show up with my abandonment and my attachment issues right out front and center, that if they don't respond the way I want them to, something's wrong with me. So I feel like that's the work that you're able to say of like, oh no, you're you. And just because somebody doesn't respond, that's us seeking validation from someone else. And so really being able to learn how to seek validation internally. I mean, that's a differentiated person. And then the attachment piece is when somebody really steps into their differentiated self, then they're no longer trying to figure out, man, how do I say this so that maybe my parent will agree? Or how do I say this so that then I'll still be liked? So I don't know. I love the question, because and I was noticing that this weekend. I'm at my in-laws for dinner last night, and they're very like stage 3 and kind of telling me what I need to tell everybody today. And I felt like, that was, bless their heart. I mean, I realized in the past I would have said, you guys don't understand, but I thought that's not their goal. I don't have to seek that validation from them. And I was expressing it to my wife, and she was like, okay, I'm excited that you're excited, but she didn't. I was so pumped last night because I was like, I just sat there and, man, no, tell me more. Yeah, that's a good point. That sounds like a great podcast. They don't even listen to my own podcast, right? I mean, I was like, I felt very invalidated, but I realized, that isn't, I'm wanting my validation from them telling me I'm awesome. I have to just, jokingly, I can hear my wife, know that you're awesome, but know that I'm, being true to myself and not seeking that validation from somebody else. And I feel like that's a really important thing. So if I have a value of connection, then my job is not to try and, I always talk about our job is not to break down someone else's reality. So the hard part is if you're working with somebody and that's the work they're doing, the other person doesn't know that that's the goal. And so that can be the real difficult thing. And so I often talk about, there's interdependent versus codependent. I did an episode on that where interdependent is being able to, codependent, that we're talking about that view of where you are basing your validation off of the way someone else responds. And interdependent is saying, I'm an individual and, this person's an individual and, it's that together we can achieve more. Now I'm going into cliches as I see people walk out. Okay. Yeah. Okay. What's that? Oh, I didn't even know there was a password. The code word? Oh, okay, so you get credit? The password is spirit. The password is spirit. Oh, shh. I didn't know that was a secret. Sorry. I'm standing in my authentic, differentiated self, and I am not I was just invalidated, and that's okay. I'm not broken. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be able to speak to you, and I would love questions. I would love, email me, please. I will send you guys anything I can. I have online programs of pornography and parenting and stuff, and if you have people that really need access to those, I'm happy to hand those out. So I really do want to help. And if any of you have super cool things that you would like to present on a podcast, let me know as well. And Jeremy, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. Okay, thanks everybody.